Hello everybody and welcome to the Celtic Now and Forever podcast. My name is Ryan Clifford. Join me again this week on this special episode is Robert Boyle. Robert, how's things, mate?
Oh, good, thanks, Ryan.
Well, as I said, Robert, it's a really good podcast this week. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really glad you've got him on, mate. And I think both of us are really buzzing to get his stories and obviously listen to his experiences through obviously his dad.
Oh, definitely, Ryan. Yep, it's going to be a good podcast. His dad was a hero of mine.
I think most Celtic fans, mate, it's the same vibe. He's an absolute hero, a legend. Obviously, we want to introduce him. It's Jonathan Burns, obviously the son of the great legend Celtic player Tommy Burns. Jonathan, how's things, mate?
Good, lads. Thanks very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
I think it's more up us to be appreciate you, mate, because again, it's as we mentioned, your dad's obviously not here, but for you to kind of say your story and obviously your dad's, it's brilliant for us to listen in, and I think Robert, the both is a bit of, for me, a bit of aura about it, because it's brilliant to have you on, and obviously I think for the viewers as well, it'll be a good podcast.
Oh, definitely, Ryan. I was actually just going through Twitter the other day and I seen Jonathan and I thought, give him a message, man, see if he'll come on. So it was good that Jonathan replied and came on. We appreciate his time.
Especially he's a busy man. Obviously, you're in America at the moment, Jonathan. How's it been over there? Obviously, the situation now it's a bit shit what's been happening in the world. So, how's it been for the moment? And obviously, Celtic, it's not really came in hand this season.
Aye, it's well, listen, I'm in Florida, where I don't think COVID exists in Florida, or I don't think anybody recognises it. So we've been pretty lucky, to be honest with you, Ryan, in comparison to the rest of the world, because it's honestly pretty much been business as usual here. So, you know, in comparison to what's happening at home, you know, it's kind of unbelievable. But Celtic are going out their way to try and dampen my mood this season. So it's been a long season that I'm sure we'll all be happy to see the back of.
Aye, definitely, mate. I think obviously the podcast and Robert have been ranting raving all season. So I think when it comes to the season, Robert, I think it will be good to get. Obviously, we don't know how the margin situation is going to work out, but it's just a bit of more excitement because this season's been a bit of, according to the fans, it's a bit of a damn squib, isn't it?
Definitely. I'm just hoping by next week that there's a manager announced or a director of football, because it's like a dark tunnel and you've just not seen the light all season in it.
Aye, and obviously Jonathan's in America, so he obviously might not get the big kind of full brunt of the feelings over here in Glasgow, but it's been very fans aren't happy, Jonathan. I think you obviously, you're a Celtic fan yourself, so you obviously get that vibe as well.
Aye, it's one of those ones, Ryan, where it's just it just seems as if we could do no right this year, you know. And I think it's a lot of people, when things don't go right at Celtic or even at Rangers, you know, the natural thing is you're going to get criticism, and you know, I think people have spoken about recruitment and things like that, and it's a strange argument, because actually I think Celtic's recruitment probably since Neil Lennon's first term has been decent from a business point of view, and it's generated the club a lot of money, and it seemed as if we were in a good place where we were, you know, it was players kind of 23 and under, good sell-on value, and for whatever reason, Ryan, maybe it was just desperation to try and get the 10 or whatever the case may be, but we seem to abandon that, you know, and we seem to kind of just get guys in that we felt were going to do the job for a year. And you know, Shane Duffy, I mean, I think Shane Duffy, he's been a Premier League player for many years, and he's obviously a talented lad, and it's just not worked for him at Celtic. But I mean, I think anybody with two eyes would probably look and say that Shane Duffy's a penalty box striker who's going to defend deep and head the ball away. And when you come to Celtic, we need something completely different from that. You know, we need guys who can play out from the back and defend high and recover if the ball was in behind. And That's what I'm saying. Just this year, there's maybe been questionable decisions with the recruitment. So, you know, the kind of the terminus of that has been that it's just not worked on the pitch, you know, and it's a lot of things with Dubai and everything else, and it's been one thing after the other.
Because as you mentioned, the way Celtic playing, the way they've always been, the kind of the philosophy of the team, and they're not really signing main Robert, but they're not really signing players for the way the team plays and the way the structure is. They're just really signing guys that will try and get them in, they'll do a job and we'll get the 10, but it's still no planning for the future. It's always kind of short term.
I mean, yeah, it's going to. I think it's going to be short term at Celtic, Ryan, because Celtic is a selling club, and a lot of the things where, you know, we've all seen the kind of European Super League and all that kind of thing come up. Celtic need to generate money through transfers, you know, and I think that one of the things that I would maybe say this season is Neil Lennon, who's been an unbelievable servant for Celtic, you know, and he's had a really, really tough season, and eventually it's ended in him losing his job, and you've got John Kennedy in there as well, and I just think that it's probably two kind of very different outlooks on how the game should be played. I think Neil Lennon is definitely a kind of get after them, you know, go and press high and you know, get the ball forward. And whereas everything that kind of probably John Kennedy's been exposed to has been about a brand, you know, a brand of football under Rodgers, under Dahlia. So it's probably two contrasting ideas. And you know, listen, John Kennedy, I think, has a very, very good reputation, and everything that I've heard as well is that he is a fantastic coach, and there's no doubt in that. I just think that there's maybe been decisions this year with guys that we've maybe held on to as well, that it's probably just a season too long, you know, and as I say, just a cumulative effect of things that could have went wrong for Celtic, and kind of everything has, you know.
It's true about Jonathan saying there, Robert. It's actually the first I've really thought about it. What he's saying, obviously, Neil Lennon and John Kennedy, it's different type of the ways they look at football. And again, as us as fans, we don't really think about that, and that could have been one reason why it's maybe no work, because maybe one guy's want to say one thing and the other guys try to implement another thing. So again, it could be the dynamics just doesn't work this season. That's maybe why we have kind of failed.
We have heard the rumours, Ryan, of possible fallouts between the two of them. Obviously, with different philosophies of football and different coaching styles. We have heard these rumours, but again, rumours, we don't know which is true. I get what Jonathan's saying, that John Kennedy is probably highly regarded as a good coach, but a good coach doesn't make you a good manager. I think they're completely different people, and I think that's where we're lacking. Is a good manager who knows how to get the best out of the players, and I just feel if a new manager comes in, nothing against John Kennedy or Gavin Stratton, but they need to move on, and the guy needs to have his full backroom staff in that he can work with. And I think Neil Lennon should never have took the job in their terms without his own backroom staff. As we say, it didn't work out, but if it worked out, then great. But I think you can't get into a job with one arm tying behind your back and other people dictating to you how to do your job, because it will always fail in the end up.
I think it's kind of showed out now, as you mentioned. The hindsight's a wonderful thing in football. But again, talking about the manager, we just hope we can get it sorted soon, because it is on limbo now, and talk's cooled about how, and like, you know, other guys, it's all cooled. But hopefully, as you mentioned, we can get it done soon. But obviously, Jonathan, the early days, with obviously your dad growing up, was it very hard not to get involved in Celtic and football because your dad was engraved in that type of industry?
I think, Ryan, it's like everything else. I think if you grow up supporting Celtic or Rangers, you're born into it, you know, and we were like every other Celtic supporter. You know, our family was Celtic, and our situation was maybe slightly different because we were, you we were so connected with my dad's role at the club, and he's past at the club. So we were born into it. I was obviously, probably when I was very young, it was probably my dad's time at Kilmarnock, to be honest, and then from there to go and be the manager of Celtic. I think he was only 37 or 38 when he took the Celtic job the first time. So it was definitely a kind of great childhood, because it's very lucky not only to support the club but to have somebody that was so deeply ingrained in it.
I can imagine it must have been kind of obviously hectic as well. People in and out of the house, and your dad always out, and obviously for yourself, it must have been brilliant to actually been brought up in that type of atmosphere, because as you mentioned, once you're in Celtic, and from an early age, it's very hard to get out that. Once you're involved in Celtic, you very rarely leave it. You always carry it forward into your kind of later years.
Aye, exactly, and I think in football as well, that like the one thing that any kind of family that's involved in football is that you're never really settled. You're going to be moving. My dad was at Newcastle with Kenny Dalglish. From Newcastle, he went to Reading, and then from Reading, where he had an absolute nuke, we eventually came back up the road again under Kenny. So we were actually very lucky because we were able to grow up in Glasgow for the most part, apart from kind of a 18-month to 2-year spell in Reading. We were able to, live in Glasgow and grow up in Glasgow. So, in comparison to other families that are involved in football, we were very fortunate with that.
I think obviously as well, growing up in Glasgow, it's either one side or the other, isn't it? You're either Celtic or Rangers, and obviously, thankfully your dad and yourself have grown up on the good side of Glasgow.
I never had too much bother, Ryan. I went to a Catholic school, so I was all right. No, it was, listen, we've been very, very lucky, because I think in terms of my dad, he was a guy that was obviously a Celtic diehard and absolutely loved the club, but I think he was one of those kind of rare examples between Celtic and Rangers where it's a guy that's maybe respected on both sides. So we were never really exposed to, you always get one or two lunatics, but we were never exposed to, him getting abuse or whatever the case may be. It just wasn't like that for us, and I know that's not the same for everybody, but again, it's just something that we were fortunate to have. We were able to kind of grow up in an environment where we weren't exposed too much to that.
That must have been brilliant, Robert, actually being involved at an early age, from being in Celtic at that age, and your dad being involved in football. It must be a very good kind of upbringing.
Oh, it's a dream come true if you're a young boy in it. It's like to know that you could get in and round the club and get to meet your heroes, should we say. And obviously his dad maybe saying, "Oh, come over, Jonathan, there's Pierre Van Hooijdonk." Can you imagine the feeling that would be? It'd be like Christmas every day, wouldn't it? Definitely.
It'd be fantastic, wouldn't it?
Amazing. It'd be an absolute amazing experience. See, when you were younger, Jonathan, did your dad take you in and round the club and stuff like that, to meet players and just round about, obviously, the training ground and stuff like that, let you experience stuff like that?
Yeah, listen, I don't know how my mum and dad never got to jail, because to be honest. I was always, I was always kind of following my dad about. I'm sure, probably more so at Reading and when he was involved in the youths. You've got guys like Darren O'Day, Simon Ferry and stuff like that now, but those were boys that when I was kind of going to work most days with my dad, it was those lads that were maybe the 17s that, the kind of full-time players. So, I actually remember one story that kind of sticks in my head was, it was a Christmas day and my dad comes in the door and my mum's obviously stressed to the eyeballs because every auntie, uncle, everything is in the house, and he sticks his head around the kitchen door and goes like that, "Rosemary, that's George Cadet and his wife here, 2 more plates ready. So she was calling him for everything, but my God, George Cadet had to absorb some amount of shite that day. We were actually playing later that night, usual stuff on Christmas Day, so we were playing a game, and it was Jenna, and Jenna won't forgive me for telling this, but we were playing I Spy. So George Cadet, who's got a very loose grasp of English as it is sitting there, and Jenna's like, well, I Spy my little eye, something beginning with H. So this went on for about 15 minutes, people guessing things with H, and so, like, Jenna, we give up, what is it? And she went like that, ornament. She thought ornament started with this. With H. My dad was like that, fucking hell, he doesn't know English as it is, and now he thinks ornament spelled with an H. So honestly, it was stuff like that all the time. He was terrible for that, just turning up with guys, you know, he's coming for dinner, and my poor mum, honestly, she was put through the ringer.
That's brilliant. Like, I don't think you would get that in modern football now, Jonathan. Like, players going to managers' houses. I don't know. Maybe they do, but it's not something you would kind of see nowadays like that.
It was definitely a different time. You know, it was definitely a different time, and I think that at that point as well, you know, as we spoke before the kind of podcast started, that was a really difficult time in Celtic's history that we're coming out of, you know. So when you're trying to get players, I mean, Di Canio came from AC Milan, you know, so he's coming from a monster club, and, you know, at that time, you know, you're trying to, I think my dad was always very aware of kind of installing in the players what it was, you know, and I think that's a big part, you know, of, you know, him trying to show that, you know, Celtic was just a huge institution, you know, that meant everything, and he always made sure that the players were round about that and exposed it, you know, because in the same token, like George Cadet that day probably had to sit between 2 of my uncles who talked about nothing but Celtic for about 3.5 hours, you know. So it's one of those ones where I think he always knew that players coming maybe weren't aware of the size of Celtic or the scale of it, and he wanted to make sure that they knew that, you know.
Yeah, brilliant. See, like, round about the club and that, what great experiences, like when you were round about the club with players? Did you have a good laugh with players? Did you get a kick about with the players when you were young and that? Did you have any great experiences, even the youth players coming through at the time?
The youth players, like, as I say, that was a great time for the youth players because there was just so many great lads. I mean, Simon Ferry, Darren O'Day, but you had Dermot O'Carroll, Rocco Quinn, Michael McGlinchey, you know, Dino Richardson. Just, there was a lot of top players there at Celtic in the youths at that time. And listen, the stuff, you know, the stuff that used to happen with that group of youth players, they were mental, you know. So I don't think they would get away with it now. But in terms of experiences, like, you know, I remember one day getting taken into Celtic Park. We went in early, and it was Henrik Larsson, you know. So I was kind of, my dad just be like, you go in there and sit down. So then Henrik came in, and like any kid, you know, that was God. And Henrik came in and spoke away, and Henrik was like that, do you play? And my dad be like that, oh, Henrik, hey, he's deceiving, that lad. He's deceiving. And Henrik was like, oh yeah. He goes like, aye, he's fucking slower than he looks. And just like that in front of Henrik, you're like that, oh God, you know. But there was, as I say, very, very lucky, you know, to kind of, we did have those experiences, you know, but definitely probably more on the youths when I was growing up. That was my kind of memory of going and kicking a ball about at the side of the pitch at Barrowfield while the full-time lads were in, you know. So loved it, absolutely loved it.
Brilliant, really good, isn't it, Ryan?
It's, as I say, mate, it's a lot of guys. Even now, I'm nearly 28, and I still love the youth team in the first team just to see what happens and what they do. But I think, as Jonathan says, I think obviously I watch the open goal and stuff here. I'm into podcasts, so you listen to ex-players talking about obviously that youth team, and they all say that era, the youth, was kind of brilliant for them to kind of grow up. And obviously, your dad was obviously a part of kind of bringing him up as I've marked it down for kind of later on, but I'm going to speak it now because I think it's a big thing your dad was to make guys not just better players but better people. And I think they kind of speak about that, like how that was their best days of their kind of youth system, the best days of your football career, because kind of having the experience with your dad and how he was like a father figure, and I think that just shows you the man he was, and I think the respect I've got for him as well at that era, and obviously it carried on through his full career.
I think it's definitely one of those ones where, you know, I think in terms of like my dad's coaching and stuff like that, yeah, I don't think there's any doubt that he was a top coach, but I don't think that he was, or he pretended to be, a tactical genius. I think everything that he'd done was very simple, and I think like any kind of top coach, it's about how they get their message across and how quickly they get the players to understand that message. So I think in terms of that, you're right. I actually was speaking to Darren O'Day the other day, and Darren kind of mentioned, he says, I don't ever remember one drill that your dad done. He goes like that, but I think all I remember and everything that any player remembers is how they were treated as people, you know, and that's probably the lasting thing, because listen, coaches will come and go, but I think you remember who treated you right and stuff like that, you know. So with regards to that, I always think that that's something that boys like Ferry and stuff like that always kind of go back to.
Because it is definitely something, Robert, you hear quite a lot when you listen to the kind of experts speaking. It is obviously, he was a great, as we mentioned, a great manager, a great player, but it was the personality of him, and I think that's what a lot of people kind of take of it. He was a funny man, but it was the respect. You've got to respect the canteen lady. You've got to and I think that's just. I don't know if that happens these days, and I don't know if that's maybe that was the era when it was big, and again Tommy could have been one of the main guys that brought that into Celtic.
I think it was just his personality that shone through. The way he treated people was with total respect. Whether you were coming through at the youth level or whether you're Paolo Di Canio, he treated everybody the same. And I think I never get coached by him personally, obviously, but I think if a guy like that treats you like that and is very good to you, I think you would run through a brick wall for somebody like that. Like just playing football for a young age myself, I remember Michelle McManus's dad. It was on the X Factor. We were in St Bridget's and he was our manager in primary school, and I just remember the boys all having so much respect for him, and he would say, look, we'll not train tonight, lads, because you've just won at the weekend, blah, blah, blah. And he was just an amazing guy, and everybody in our team had that much respect and would do it for him. If he says to you, look, playing goals, you'd have done it. And I think that's the way it must have been with Tommy Burns. Just every youth player, every senior player just had so much respect and he treated them well. And that's just obviously shown through the full team and the academy. Because look at the players we developed through Tommy's help.
Aye, definitely. As Jonathan says, that era with Simon Ferry and stuff, they have talked about Jonathan as been, obviously some guys have come through and some guys haven't, but they were talked about as a very, very talented group of players.
Definitely. They had Eddie McGeady in there as well, didn't they? He was probably meant to be the top one of them all, wasn't he? And he spoke so highly of Tommy.
I think as Jonathan says as well, I think it's just being respectful. I think that was the thing, wasn't it? Jonathan, the players they obviously reacted to him in that way, and obviously as Robert mentioned, it was obviously good. It was good for him playing football because they obviously done well for him as well.
Yeah, I think the best thing about him, Ryan, was his human qualities. I think he knew everything about every player. I think he knew where they came from. I think he knew, the little sister. I think I think there's just so many situations where he would have done anything. He would have done anything for those players. And if you bought in and he liked you, and Ferry's one of them, because listen, I think he loved Simon Ferry more than he loved me, to be honest with you. He absolutely loved Simon. But Simon as a youth player, I mean, it kind of gets undersold how good Simon was. And then he picked up a terrible injury and still went on to have a decent career. And But he knew everything about his players, and he really cared. And I think that, just going back to the point that Robert kind of alludes to is, I think that's exactly right. I think he had guys that would do anything for him, absolutely anything for him. And throughout his kind of career, I think that, there's no many guys that would kind of turn around and say that wasn't a good time in their career playing for him, or whatever the case may be, because I think they knew exactly where they stood with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they knew that if you put everything into playing for the club, he'll put everything into, making sure that it's a good environment for you.
Because obviously, you mentioned Simon Ferry. I know he talks himself down a bit on open goal and stuff, and he says I wasn't that good and all that, but it's obviously, the story I kind of take for the open goal was, I don't think you probably heard it before, but it was the one when he was kind of he was going up to Celtic as a youth, and when they took him in the changing room, he says, in here serious and all that, and he says he walked in, he says they're all kind of like dry humped, and the physio bed, he's like, whatever that says, pal, just get that to
Aye,
and
aye.
That's superb.
Midge's got somebody bent over the whole place was, I mean, you had big personalities now, and I think, Ryan, that's something that's it's maybe a little bit sad. No saying this about Celtic in particular. Maybe just youth football in general is just the characters are maybe out of it. And I think the characters are always ones that you're sink or swim. Because Celtic at that time to come through was very difficult as well. I mean, that was a first team changing room full of men. You'd Thompson, Lennon, Sutton, Hartson, and it was hard. It was hard, and I think you're maybe seeing now. I think you're maybe seeing now a little bit tougher getting youth players into that first team environment, and more worryingly so. I think you're starting to see a lot of good Scottish talent as soon as they turn 16. Look to get moves to either England or Germany, whatever the case may be, and I don't know how you stop that. I don't, and I'm sure brighter minds than me are have far more of an input on it. But that was a time at Celtic where those lads were all good players, but really good characters as well. And as I say, they wouldn't get away with half the stuff now. They'd be sacked, I will tell you that. But they've all got stories and they've all got memories of it. And largely they all went on to have good careers as well, Ryan, which is the thing. So yeah, as much as they loved a laugh, they were a really good bunch of talented players.
So I think when you, obviously, a lot of stuff they've done now, it can't happen, but I do agree with you, and I think Robert will as well, that I think Robert is missing the way, obviously, Jonathan says about characters. People, as soon as a football player knows a character, it's getting out the club, but you need characters in a change room. I played in myself when there was maybe a bad boy in the change room, or a guy who's maybe a bit of an idiot, but on the park, in Arthur Park, he was superb, but because he was maybe a wee bit of a lunatic, people thought, get him out, he's a character. And I think football's like that now. I don't think it should be. You need characters, as Jonathan says. You need these guys in the change room and in the youths growing up.
I think that's just life in general now, Ryan. I think everybody's, should we say, a snowflake mentality. You can't say this, you can't do that. Just a wee instance, the other night, Tumble kicks a leg away for Lewis Ferguson. There's no malicious in it, and everybody's screaming on Twitter, that should be a red card. And I'm thinking, God, they wouldn't have liked to have played in Vinnie Jones's day if they think that's a red card. You know what I mean? Or even a Graham Souness type of guy, or John Hughes, Yogi Hughes. Football just is soft now throughout, and I think they're too, as Jonathan says, you've got Celtic have lost a lot of youth players to Liverpool, Bayern Munich, Man City, and I think now it's not about really going and winning. I don't know, saying they're no interest in going and winning trophies, but it's trying to make much money as quickly as they possibly can now. I think that's a problem in football now. When some of these guys played when they're younger, they played for the love of the game. Now I think it's more about love for the money and quickly as earning the money as quickly as they can. Because I think, I'm not saying that they're no talented boys, but I can't see many of them getting a chance at Bayern Munich, Man City or Liverpool before they get a chance at Celtic. So I don't know why they would go. I don't know. Maybe it's just they think they're talented enough, or their agents or their fathers telling them go to these places and develop themselves as professional football players. But for me, when I was growing up, I didn't care about any other club. I was never good enough to play for Celtic. But don't get me wrong, obviously your head can be turned. But Celtic, for me, if I'm a Celtic supporter, I'd have wanted to stayed and done what Kieran Tierney done, played my career at Celtic, won trophies, and then possibly moved on. These guys are moving before they've even done anything. It's strange now, football. Very, very strange.
But as you mentioned, I just think that's just life in general. I just think I think, as Jonathan mentioned, the youth is maybe, it's not dying out, but it's dying out when it's in that sense. And obviously, back in his dad's day, when it was with Simon Ferry and stuff like that, I think it is a big thing that they speak about, and it's obviously something that, again, will that ever happen again? Have that crop of youth, Jonathan? I don't know if it will, because I think that time was a very special era for the youth system.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is I think coaching has changed as well, Brian. I think that it's definitely a situation where it's, you know, I always remember him saying, I always remember my dad saying that, you know, the coach, the kind of person you are should be reflected when you're on the pitch, you know. So I think with my dad, for example, I mean, the security guards used to say, if it was a 10 o'clock in the morning session, they used to say, turn the floodlights on, because he'd be down there for about 3 hours and it would be buzzing about, but the players would love it. You know, the players would love it. And I think, you know, Robert's 100% right. You know, football it's changed. It's changed, and, you know, you've got sports scientists now, and you've got to look at the load of the session, and this player can't train here, and that's fine. You know, it's for the wellness of the player, and I understand that, but it just wasn't what it was like back then. You know, it wasn't what it was like, and there was no bitching from the players. Whatever the players loved it. You know, the players absolutely loved it. So the sport has changed. There's no doubt about it. And Celtic has, listen, I was lucky enough to work in Celtic's academy for 7 years. So Celtic has some unbelievable coaches. It does. And there is unbelievable talent at Celtic. And it's, the situation is, you know, I always think it's a catch-22 at Celtic, because the fans, they want to win, and they want to win trophies, and that's part and parcel of being Celtic. But they want players. They want players bought. You know, they want these £10 million players. And at that point, whether you like it or not, if Celtic spent £10 million on somebody, and there's a 17-year-old behind them that definitely could be a player, the manager's going to be under pressure. He's going to be under pressure. That player's got to play. You've spent money on him, you know, whatever the case may be. So it's very difficult. And I don't think that's a Celtic thing. I think that's just elite. To break through. So it's, I mean, listen, as I say, with Celtic, I don't think it is a case of lack of development. I don't think that at all. I think there's top players there. I just think that, you know, especially when you're chasing the 10, I think it was very much a bottleneck to try and get players in there, because it meant so much to everybody.
I think it's obviously, as you mentioned, us as fans, we don't, obviously you've worked at academy, so you know more than us. So, but we don't know much about all that, so we just assume that you've got to spend money. But I think, as well as me and Robert were doing this podcast and getting other people's opinions from maybe worked in football, and obviously some fans who were kind of very good opinions. I think when we had Joe on recently, Robert, it was true what he says about, like, if you sign a £10 million Italian guy because he's got a fantastic name, he's brilliant. But it could be a Scottish guy who's, as Jonathan says, 17, 18, with just a Scottish name, and because he's Scottish, he might not get a chance, but because that Italian guy's come in, he'll get the game there.
Well, the example is Jack Henry in Belgium now. I'm not saying Jack Henry's turned into Cannavaro overnight, but he's been voted stats the best player in Belgium. That's it. So if he turned in and Jack Henry's name was a Belgian name at 22, 23 years of age, people would go, why are we not signing that guy? I don't know. Maybe the guy, that suits him. Maybe that bit of football just suits him well in Belgium. I do not know. But if somebody looked at Jack Henry on stats and he was a Belgian name at 23 years of age, what would the first thing everybody be screaming at? Get him signed. It's true, innit? Joe was right on that one.
Aye, is that something, do you think you'd agree with, Jonathan? Do you think that's maybe something these days it's just happened now that guys want to spend money instead of having to maybe give the youth guy a chance because maybe they are coming in from a foreign country, big money, big expectations, and that's why they play. And then if they're not good enough, they might go right and then we'll play a youth guy. Do you think that's maybe something they might need to look at eventually?
I mean, I think at Celtic, it's just the expectation at Celtic is you've got to win.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to win, and you've got to win every game. And I always remember my dad saying that Celtic players will be judged in games against Rangers and in the Champions League. That should be what Celtic players are judged on, because those are the games that are the most elite levels. And I think Darren O'Day told a story as well about him playing against AC Milan one night and old man pulling him after the game like that. Right, you've done well, but God, this is the level you've got to be at every week, you know. And it's really, really hard. It's really hard, and I've got a lot of sympathy because I think you've got this Colts plan that's coming through,
mm-hmm.
And I do think that would be beneficial to the clubs that could put Colts teams in. Now, whether that's Hibs, Hearts, Aberdeen, Celtic, Rangers, I do think that would be a benefit. But I do see the other side of it as well, while those lower league clubs don't want it. But there's no question that Scottish people in general, you know, love being pessimistic and love being harsh. So, you know, you see a player come through, if he doesn't hit the ground running and have like an Aidan McGeady type debut, then he's mince.
Mm-hmm.
Get somebody, but we don't need him. Get him in. What's he doing? So I've got sympathy because I think at big clubs it's hard to come through as it is, and I think in west of Scotland, big clubs, it's really, really difficult.
Aye, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. As fans, you do expect so much. I think that is because, as you say, we're Celtic, so you always expect to win. And if a guy doesn't have a brilliant debut, as you mentioned, he's mince, he's not good enough. So I think maybe sometimes you do need to take a step back and maybe let these guys develop. If it is either a 10-game period, 20-game period, I think they need to develop. And I think that's maybe something Celtic need to look at. Maybe Celtic fans need to look at longer term, as obviously you want success, but you've got to remember you've always got to plan for the future, and these players who are in the youths are the future. And obviously we don't know how money's going to be after the pandemic and Brexit, so maybe these youth guys might get a chance to come up in a few years to come.
Yeah, and I think that the whole, listen, whether we won the 10 or whether we didn't win the 10, that Ryan, I always think that after this season there was going to be a change anyway, because there had, everybody understands that Celtic needs to win and needs to win the league and needs to be competing in the Champions League, and there's no doubt about that. But I think there does have to be an onus as well of how do we get players on a regular basis, you know, coming in and being in and around the first team. And like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if next season is the start of that, because I think there has to be a lot of players that you would imagine are going to go out the door, you know, so it's going to be tough to do a full rebuild for the start of next season.
See, Jonathan, on reserve football, your dad would obviously have been big in reserve football. Do you feel that's how it's taken youth players such a hard, like, to go from youth football to first team football, because they've not got reserve football to play against seasoned pros and stuff like that coming back from injury?
I mean, personally, yeah. But I mean, listen, the guys that make decisions have forgot more than I know, you know, so I'm sure there's logic behind it. But what I will say is I think there's too big of a gap just now in Scotland between academy and first team. And I don't think that it's possible to kind of float about in limbo from 18 to 23 without a structure that's getting them ready for that jump to the first team. And you know, I think it wouldn't surprise me with COVID and the financial impact that that's had on Scottish football. It wouldn't surprise me if now the Colts thing happened, because I think the bigger clubs are probably in a position to almost use that as like a leverage. And I don't mean that in a bad way, you know, but I think that with COVID, it's probably brought the opportunity that, you know, these clubs are going to sink a bit of money into the game and the game badly needs it.
No, definitely, because me and Ryan I've always spoke about reserve football when I was young. I used to have it in your season book and stuff like that. You used to be able to go to Celtic Park and watch these of youth players coming through and saying how much that playing against guys who's probably first team regulars at Celtic or Rangers or Aberdeen, and just playing against them rather than playing against people at their own age, and how it developed them and made them stronger and made it easy to get back, like to go to the first team for like guys like Charlie Mulgrew, as you say, Darren Adaid and McGeady. These guys teach them lessons that they'll learn at youth football. You can be all the talent in the world you want, but to play against a seasoned pro and know the do's and do nots of football, then that's the only way you're going to learn, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think if you look at Aidan McGeady's situation, I mean, Aidan McGeady was in about the reserves, he was about 16, you know, 16, and you know, you had Kenny McDowell in there as well, and Kenny was a brilliant coach, but I mean, Kenny was a tough man as well, you know, and like, I think he was probably the perfect reserve coach at the time for that first team, you know, because he really set an environment there where it was very much like, you think you do that here, you know, how are you supposed to go and play for a first team with 60,000 screaming at you? And like I say, it's I think it is probably just something that over the next 3 to 5 years, you hope that something can kind of work itself out. I know the SFA implemented Project Brave, which was something that was really, really good in theory in terms of, you know, elite level, and we want everything to be elite with those youth setups. And I think that there is a lot of great coaches working in academy football in Scotland. It's just looking, I think, and it's only my opinion, of course, but I just think the next things the gap between academy and first team, you know, how do we bridge it?
It's definitely something we've spoken about quite a lot. Jonathan is obviously trying to bring it back. We spoke about it months ago, and then obviously it was in the papers, and we're thinking that. I'm glad, because we've kind of says it would gear maybe guys who are not playing every week some competitive football, and I think that's maybe what's missing for the youths, because it's all right playing football and the youth level, but you're going to learn playing against guys your own age all the time, and I think it's true what both he says. The reserve football for me is something I think that I'd like to bring back in. And obviously, Jonathan, we've spoke about how like, your dad was very, very kind of highly thought of by a lot of people in football. How was he as a dad to yourself, and obviously as a husband to your mum? It must have been a great kind of family kind of era as well.
I don't know what my mum would say, but no, listen, he was amazing, because you know, I get asked that question a lot. You know, what was it like having Tommy Burns as your dad? And I was like, I don't know. I mean, what's it like having your dad as yours? You know what I mean? Like, it was just dad to us, you know, and it, like everything else, you know, he was around. He didn't bring football home with him. You know, I don't really remember, you know, him coming home stressed out. You know, he was always very good at kind of shielding that side of it. You know, and I think that he's, you know, like I say, we spoke about his human qualities in regards to his coaching and all that, but he had all that. He had all that as a dad as well. You know, I think the best compliment you could ever give him was just you absolutely loved being around him. You loved being around him because he was so funny. You know, his stories. You know, he had a one-liner for everything, and you know, just as a dad, I think everything that you would look at and say it was a kind of model father. You know. No downside at all. Football is what it is. You know, they spend a lot of time away traveling and, you know, everything else. But when he was there, he was very present. You know,
because as you mentioned, obviously, people says as you mentioned about your human qualities. Actually, I text my mate saying that you were coming on if you hadn't taken a ask if you want to find out anything about it, and he says, well. He says there was a game one day. He says, I can't remember the game, as he says, but they were all went outside for autographs for the players. And he says that a few players must not give him autographs. And he says, your dad walked over and says, all right, son, sign. And he's like, wow. It just shows you that, he says it was the class of him. Players didn't do it, but he took his time out to talk to me and give me an autograph. And he says, that made my day. He says, I went to school that next day, pure buzzing. Oh, I met Tommy Byrne. He says it made my day, and I think that just shows you the class of him as a man and as a Celtic man.
Yeah, I never, Ryan, in my life seen him turn down anybody for an autograph or a picture. And I never seen that in my life. And I went to Seville with him. And Mother of Jesus, it was like, honestly, it was like, I've never seen it like it. We could not move. We could not move. And, you know, and he signed every single one. And eventually what we had to do is we had to hide up this lane. There was a little bar in the lane. And we sat up there, you know, our friends, Tony Kelly, and we sat in that bar all day because we couldn't. I mean, the minute he came out, it was like there was 1,000 people around him, and he would never say no. You know, he would never say no. And I think he always knew. I think he always knew kind of what the Celtic fans meant to him, you know, and what he meant to them. And there was no way in this earth that he would ever turn down anybody that was looking for anything like that.
That's definitely something. I don't know, Robert. I think obviously it doesn't really happen now. A lot of players kind of palm it off, even managers palm it off. So it just shows you, again, as we've spoken about so many times, just a brilliant man and has a lot of time for people. Because I think, as he always says, he was a fan to get lucky, and I think he realises the fans are a big part of the club, and I think that was something, again, to me, it's absolutely brilliant for him as a man.
He's just, Tommy Burns, just what Jonathan said there, that's all I remember of Tommy Burns, just the person, the character, and as you say, he's a fan that get lucky, but you know what? He always appreciated the fans. He always spoke highly enough of the fans, because at the end of the day, he was just a fan that got lucky. Obviously, a lot of talented player and a lot of talented coach and manager, but just the character of the man was just unbelievable. I actually just read a story the other day about, I think it was Patrice Evra, and he was talking about Man U players and how they walked by supporters and just went on the bus, and Alex Ferguson seen it and went on and roasted every one of the players, and he shouted F and this and F and that. They people pay money to come and watch you, they people pay your wages, and he made every one of them get off the bus and sign autographs. He says, oh, we've just been training. And I think in the game now, I'm not saying you don't get that, but there's not as many people as that in the game nowadays, and I think that's the problem with modern football, is just money and the arrogance of players and probably coaches and stuff. Like my mate, he's a big Chelsea fan and doesn't support any other club, weirdly enough, in Glasgow, but he supports Chelsea. And he told me a story, like he was doing at Chelsea and he was obviously younger at the time, and he was trying to get guys' autographs. And I think it was like two of the worst players at Chelsea at the time, because they were all pure superstars. And two of them, like Sean Wright Phillips, I think it was, and somebody else, like I can't remember who else. And he says they two like snubbed all the fans. And he thought, of all the superstars that walked out there, they've signed autographs, and they two clowns didn't sign autographs. And he thought he was raging. He actually said he hated the two of them. Sean Wright Fox was one, and I can't remember the other one, but it just shows you like people aren't even that big in the game, and they're just snubbing fans. I think that's just the arrogance of players coming through nowadays. It's bad.
But again, I think obviously Jonathan's dad obviously realised that was something that maybe he thought he had to do. It was something that he was not, I'm a one of them, so I'm going to do what I need to do. And I think it's the story about Seville, Jonathan, that's superb. I didn't know that happened. So again, it just shows you, as you says, no, I need to sign the autographs, I need to do it. It's a funny story in a way, because he was obviously bombarded with a lot of fans, and it took a lot of time to sign 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 autographs.
He's, and you know, I think he's. I remember as well. You know, my gran lived in the Drygate. She lived in the Drygate across for the necropolis, and you had his uncle George lived actually basically on the Gallagate. You know, and I remember going to visit his uncle George one night, and we get in the house, but we drive by the young team on the way in. So we're in there for about 5 minutes, and then it's the door goes, and so George goes to the door and says, "What is it? Is that Tam Burns in there?" And then George's like, "No, Tam Burns isn't in. You know, he's not in." So then next thing you know, the full young team appears at the living room window like that. So we were caught. So then that was him for the next hour and a half. He was out, you know, signing all the autographs and doing the pictures for them, and you know, in equal measure, to be honest with you, Ryan, he was an absolute terror. He terrorised some folk in at that Celtic Park, because, you know, I remember the doctor, Derek McCormack, who actually when he was very ill, Derek was amazing. I mean, Derek was at our house probably about 15 hours a day. You know, he was a Celtic club doctor and a great man. But I remember one night, I think we were playing Spartak Moscow. It was a picture where he's jumping on players.
Yeah.
So what you probably don't see in that picture is if it pans right, Dr. Derek is at the side of it as well. So obviously, you know, my dad gets hold of that, and he gets the girls in the office to draft up a fake letter from UEFA. So they've put on the UEFA stamp and put the address and all that. And, you know, he goes into like the doctor's office the next day in the stadium's like, "Oh," he goes, "Have you heard?" And the doctor's like, "No." He goes, "Oh." He goes, like, "UEFA's just sent this letter saying that we're fined 50 grand for no controlling our staff." And the doctor fucking... Oh, honest to God, I think the doctor needed mouth to mouth. He was absolutely flapping, you know. He was, and like the doctor always got it, you know. He always got absolutely battered by him. But again, it was one of the ones where you know, he could absolutely roast you 1 minute, you know, and then 2 minutes later you're best pals again. You know, he had that about him. So honestly, he was, some of the things that he'd done to people in there, I don't think they'll ever forgive him for, but he was, they got a good laugh at it, if nothing else.
He was good at the old singing as well, wasn't he, Jonathan?
Thought he was. Aye, he's listen, we always kind of had like family parties like in the house, you know, and we would have the Bonners and the McGarveys, the Nicholases, and because we all lived very close to each other. My sisters told the story before. It was an absolute rab, you know. Everybody's trying to get a song in, and you know, we would have new song nights where you had to learn a new song and then come and perform it, and it was just, as I say, like amazing memories, you know. But the singing was, God, it was one singer, one song, and oh Jesus, it was aggressive. You know, if you butted in somebody else's song, it was, you'd be murdered for that, you know. So, but great times, great nights.
Brilliant, really good. See, at Celtic, your dad being there, what great memories did you have? What stands out for you? Players, your dad, European nights?
I would say the best memories for me, Robert, were probably in the Strachan era. Because I think then I was probably at an age where, I really understood it. I really kind of understood what it meant. And, maybe when you're kind of at primary school or those younger age groups, it doesn't quite affect you as much. So I think those nights where, if I had to pick one of what I would say was just an amazing night, the Man United game at home, unbelievable. Just probably my favourite game. Just the drama, Boric saving the penalty, and just everything, and just how much that meant, because I think that took us through the last 16 as well. So I remember it just being, God, just everybody was just floating, because I think Strachan and Ferguson were maybe no tighter than two coats of paint. So I think it meant a lot from that point of view as well. I think I remember going to the San Siro, and I was with my mum and my sister Jenna, and we went to the San Siro, and it was the night that Kaká ran about 70 yards. So, I mean, you'll remember, Robert, the San Siro is quite literally in the middle of nowhere. I mean, they've got a cheap say it's in Milan because there's just nothing. So we're walking for miles and miles. So then all of a sudden we hear the clapping and all that. I'm like, what's that? So that shows you how, how long we'd walked for, because the team bus is an hour after the game, an hour and 15 minutes maybe. So we're walking, and the Celtic team bus is coming up the road. And Gordon's seen us. Gordon's seen me, Jenna, and my mum, and he's pointing and he's saying, "Tam, there's," and he just comes up and he goes like that. So Gordon goes like that. Do you want us to pick them up? And he goes like, "Oh no, they love all that," and with the fans and that. Honestly, Robert, I don't think I had feet left by the time I got back to the hotel. We must have walked for about 2.5 hours. I could have absolutely murdered them that night, because it was genuinely one of those ones where it's not even as if God thought you would have seen us. Like, actually stood up front of the bus, waved, and we were 2.5 hours from there back to the hotel. But
we done the day trip for that, sorry, Jonathan, and me and my mate at the time, and I think it was like £330. So we just literally get dropped off in the square, and then got to the stadium, and then after the game, ushered onto buses and straight out to the straight onto the airport. So we were literally in Milan for about 10 hours, I think. That was how it worked.
I'm jealous, Robert, because I walked about 10 hours that night.
Some experience. But see, your dad that night, before the game, we were right down the right-hand side, and the players were doing the warm-up, and your dad came over and applauded the supporters. And I think there was about 15,000-20,000 days there. And I think, see, just the roar of the support, obviously when your dad came over and kind of clapped to support that night, before Darnley Day and all that took the warm-up right in front of Celtic supports, I think that just G'd the fans up that night. Like, we actually believed we could have went there and done something. It was brilliant. Some experience.
Aye, to be honest with you, Robert, we were probably really unlucky not to
We
do
were
it.
unlucky, very unlucky.
I think Kaká at that time was probably one of, if not the best player in the world, and he just had one moment of, he got 1-on-1 with Steve McManus, and the rest was history, I think. But
he just guided by Neil Lennon in the halfway line, didn't he? And I was like, oh no.
It made them look as if they were standing still, But no, but if I was to pick one, I would say the Man United game at home was the one that I would the Spartak one was great, because I think penalties is always, the best way to win and worst way to lose, isn't it? But the Man United one was just, I think, typical of Celtic on a Champions League night, where just anything's possible, and you could beat anybody, because Man United were obviously a top team at that time.
Yeah.
So, amazing. That night was just amazing.
Really, really good stories. Good to hear them, Jonathan.
I think, see, like for me, I've only been to a few European games, but I've never walked that far. And if I have been drunk, so I can't remember. but that's just I didn't know Milan was like that, Jonathan. I didn't know Milan. The stadium was. I thought it was in the actual Milan. I didn't think it was like in the outskirts, basically.
No, it was honestly. So what happened is basically the Celtic fans were they were in this square called Duomo, which is in front of the cathedral, and then everybody was kind of shepherded onto these buses, and the buses took you to the San Siro. But when we came out, the buses had fucked off. There was nothing, so you were just walking, and nobody really knew where they were going. To be honest with you, it was like blind leading the blind. Like people were just walking in a direction, and oh God, honestly, it was one of the ones where you've just been beat as well. You know what I mean? And everybody's gutted, so you're like that. Is there ever going to be an end to this walk? But we had a good one as well. Ryan I went to the World Cup with him in 2006, went to Germany.
Brilliant.
And Bertie Vogts had kind of organised it for us. So we were to fly into, I can't remember the name. We'd flown to the wrong airport in Germany, and we'd arrived at midnight. So Bertie had sent a driver and all that to the airport, and my dad's phoned Bertie and been like, "Aye, we're here." So Bertie's like, "Well, the driver's there," and literally, I mean, this could have been an Air Force base, right? There was nothing, and my dad was like, "No, Bertie's here." He goes, like, "What airport you at?" And he told him, he goes, like, "Tommy," he says, that's 2 hours away. So we nothing. We're in Germany, right? And if you've ever been to Germany, just like the Germans speak German, and you're kind of on your own. So this Celtic fan was on the flight, and he got his bags and he was like, "Oh, Tommy," he goes, "Can I give you a lift anywhere?" And my old man explained the situation, and the Celtic fan just said to him, "I jumped in the motor." The Celtic fan wasn't going there, but he took him 2 hours to the hotel we were supposed to be at. And I was just thinking, if you fell in the Clyde, you'd come up with a fucking salmon. Literally flew to the wrong airport with absolutely nothing, and a Celtic fans just absolutely saved our lives that night, because I honestly don't know what we would have done between the two of us.
That's brilliant. Really, really good.
Because obviously, I think it's a lot of people all knew that his faith was a massive thing for him. Was that kind of ingrained into you as well as a family, or was it merely just him? It was a big in his faith.
Yeah, I mean, listen, his faith was. I mean, he went to mass every day. I mean, I don't go to mass every day. I don't think. I try and get as often as I can. But
was it true that he went before every training session? Was that true?
He would normally go between the training sessions. He would nip up to kind of St Alphonsus, I think it is, just at the back of the Gallagate. St Mary's as well, obviously, right there. So he would go every single day, and if it wasn't for mass, he would just go and sit himself for half an hour in the chapel. And there used to be a physio at Celtic called Niam Mohammed. He was a great physio, but Niam used to call him Silas out of the Da Vinci Code. The guy that Vinci selling that. So Niam used to call him Silas, and it was everybody knew that his faith was very, very big to him. And he put everything into his faith. Everything good or bad that happened in his life. It was just right. Well, there's a plan for it, and I think probably even when he was ill, I think that's something that really helped him. That kind of belief that there was something else.
That's probably maybe comforting for you and for him as well, obviously, because he was very ill. But as a family, maybe knowing that he was very comfortable in his faith, it maybe helped you as well.
Aye. I mean, definitely, because it's listen, I think he was definitely in a situation where there's fear, and there's going to be fear, especially if you're in that situation where you're that ill. But I think that his faith just probably got more developed at that point, and he put more into it, because I think he was comfortable with the fact that he'd lived his life the right way, and he never walked away from his faith. He always put trust in it. So I think you're right. I think there was a big comfort, and listen, more for him, because I think for us, look, when it happened, you're always going to be devastated, because a massive part of your lives is left, and the devastation of losing him is probably overwhelming. But for him, looking back, the comfort is that he was probably at peace with the fact that there was something else that he believed in, and that was definitely something that you can look back on and take comfort.
So I think that's maybe something it's maybe kind of good to hear, Robert, in a sense that the faith was, even though till the day he did pass away, that it was obviously a big thing for him to actually keep at his faith, and that, as Jonathan says, it obviously helped him until obviously went to the other side and obviously a better place now.
Yeah, definitely, Ryan. I've had a lot of, as you know, stuff through family and that, and it kind of pushed me away from my faith. I'm not saying I'm doing the right thing, but you just question life, and obviously I can take inspiration from what Jonathan saying, that his dad, it pushed him more to his faith. Maybe I'm doing things wrong, but obviously in time I'll just work that one out myself. But it's very good to hear what Jonathan's saying, that it helped him as a family, his faith and stuff, to get through the grief that you go through in life. It certainly makes you stronger, and it's just probably comforting to know that his dad lived his life exactly how he wanted, and he's got amazing stories with his dad, and everything that's actually happened that he can look back and say, my dad's lived a life what somebody at 100 probably didn't get to live, if you get what I mean on that sense. So I can relate to him and stuff like that, because obviously my dad had passed away and stuff like that, so I do get where he's coming from and that, and it's hard, but it gives you great memories from my dad taking me to the football, just the way Jonathan's dad took him to the football, so I can relate to him in a lot of that.
Because obviously as well, it's a big thing to go through, obviously, and I think obviously with the faith side of it, I think the two are spot on with it. I think Jonathan, it's obviously kind of in your later life, is that something you continue to do, or is it something you're kind of, as you mentioned, kind of, it's not a really big thing in your life anymore?
With regards to,
but the faith side, are you big on it, or is it not really something?
I mean, listen, Ryan, nowhere near my old man's level, but I don't think the Pope's on his level. So, I would say that I agree with a lot of what Robert says. I think it probably took me a long time to accept it, and I think you go through really questioning probably everything in your life at that point. But I think as well, his big thing was you can't ever be, why me? He was always very much, well, why not me? And I think every family, look, we're all going to die. We're all going to die. It's going to happen at different stages in our lives, and under different circumstances. And I think for him, from my personal point of view, I think that I'm happy that he had his faith to lean on. And, as Robert said, with everything that he achieved in his life, listen, if you had the choice between living for 101 years or living for 51 and doing what he done, playing for the team that he loved, managed the team that he loved, played for his country, albeit he would bitch about that because he never done it enough, he says. But I don't think there's one single second of his life that he would ever look upon as regret. And I mean, amazing. If we can all leave this earth with that, God, we're doing something right. Yeah,
definitely, mate. I think it's definitely something. I think it's a big thing for you, obviously, the faith side, and obviously with your dad. So it's very kind of comforting, as you mentioned, for him. Obviously, the last wee bit I was want to speak out as well is obviously your coaching at the moment. How's the coaching in America? How's it been for you? Have you been there for a while? Has it been a long term thing?
Yeah, I've been here for 5 years, Ryan. And as I said earlier, I was at Celtic for 7. And listen, even that in itself, I was so lucky, because there's no doubt about it. I managed to get in and about Celtic, because of my dad, and I managed to get in there and get a really good exposure to top coaches from a young age. And I just felt, probably coming towards the end of the 7 years, that I just had to go somewhere where I wasn't Tommy Burns' son, and go and do a job and try and do a good job and be judged on that. And I think America it was a great opportunity for me, obviously, but a great exposure to something different, Ryan, because the Americans, make no mistake about it, everything in Europe is developed, and everything in America is, we want to develop, but we want to win as well. So it's given me a kind of different, it's kind of given me a different environment to work in, and I've really enjoyed it. I don't know where it'll go in the future, Ryan. I think for me, I'm like every other coach. You want to try and work at the highest possible level with the best possible players, and I just need to keep my head down and keep going with my kind of education, and hope that somewhere along the line, I'm lucky enough to be kind of blessed with an opportunity somewhere.
Have you ever thought about, obviously you're still at a early age of your coaching career, would you ever come back to kind of Scotland coach again? Or do you think you're kind of settled working in the kind of culture abroad?
I would go anywhere, Ryan, to coach, to be honest with you, just as long as it was the kind of right opportunity. I think that, would I go back to Scotland? I mean, I love Scotland. I love Glasgow. That's my home, and if you ever get an opportunity to kind of go and work, back home, you'd be over the moon with that. But that being said, Scotland's a very, very tough place to make a living, particularly in full-time football, because there's not a lot of money in the game, number one, and there's no tons of kind of full-time positions. So America's an incredible place for opportunity. In various different levels, so I'm really open-minded, to be honest with you, Ryan. But I just think it's just, for me, just trying to get better, every day, and just trying to learn from the kind of guys that are around me, and like I say, hopefully at some point, I'm in a position where somebody deems me good enough to maybe go and work at a higher level. But like I say, there's a hell of a lot for me to do as well, so just keep grafting away.
For me, but Jonathan saying there, Robert, it's brilliant that the fact he's seen an opportunity and go, no, I need to go and better myself, and he's went abroad, because a lot of people don't really go and venture abroad and kind of challenge themselves. So for Jonathan as a coach to go and challenge himself, I think it's actually very, very good for himself, and obviously it's brilliant for him to go and do that, and obviously experience a different life somewhere else.
It speaks volumes of him that he's turned around and says, I'm taking myself out of my comfort zone of being Tommy Burns' son, because he could have probably stayed at Celtic for another 7 years, just because he's dad. And I'm not saying Jonathan's not a good coach, but Jonathan's seen that opportunity and went, I'm going to go out my comfort zone, go to America and do my own coaching. And fair play to him. I would love to do that myself. You know what I mean? As coaching. And it's really, really good to see that he's come out of his comfort zone and went and tested himself in a different environment, and obviously different country and different ways of doing things in it. It will all be different in America compared to it would be in Scotland.
I see obviously that sense, Jonathan. How is the kind of coaching sequel over there? Because obviously back here it is quite different now compared to what it was years ago. But how is it over there?
You know something, Ryan? I was kind of keeping an eye on the media when they were talking about Stephen Glass getting the Aberdeen job, and some of the articles that were written, you know, seemed to kind of painted Atlanta United as rag-arse Rovers. Atlanta United are massive, with probably one of the best training grounds in the world and playing one of the best stadiums in the world. So, you know, they're playing in front of 70,000 every week. So there's a kind of, I think people look at America and still look at it as if it's maybe years ago where guys would go out to pasture, you know, and instead of a penalty shootout, you would run for the halfway line, try and take on the goal and all that. So the game here is developed. The facilities are unbelievable. You know, and you're in a country with 350 million people, 400 million people. So the talent levels of those top teams, Ryan, is very, very good. And the infrastructure is, you know, like I say, there's a lot of people here that make really good money out of the game because it is. I mean, it's a model where there's a lot of money in football here. So, you know, when I was kind of reading the Stephen Glass thing, I was like, well, people think that he's not been working at a high level or you know, he's no used to it. I mean, Aberdeen's a massive club, of course it is, but, you know, going for Atlanta United, it wasn't as if he was getting dragged from a farm, you know, like he was already working in a very high performance environment. So, you know, listen, I think that there's a couple, it's not perfect. The model in America is not perfect. It needs to be, particularly at the youth levels, there's probably changes that need to happen to make sure that the best are getting pushed on. But there's no doubt that it's on the right path, and I think that the talent. I mean, you've seen young Cameron Harper as well at Celtic. He's back at Red Bulls, but you know, there's players in America. You know, that America has some very, very high level talent.
Can you see what obviously Jonathan saying there, Robert? Do you know, maybe think that's maybe a kind of a country where Celtic can maybe get these wee gems again for maybe a few hundred thousands and get a scout out there, because as Jonathan said, they've obviously got a lot of talent and the youths just need to get picked up, because as my old man always says, there's talent everywhere.
There's Celtic have got scouts all over America. They've got training camps all over America, right? And I think they did try with Manny Perez and Andre Gutman, but we don't know really much about that. I don't know if Jonathan can give more limelight on what happened there and what was the deals were about, because it was rather strange that none of them ever really played a game for Celtic, or they were only overtraining. I don't know if that was to do with their visas and stuff like that. I don't know if you can clarify on that, Jonathan.
I'm honestly not sure, Robert. I know with Manny Perez, he came from, I think he was playing at NC State, which is a university, you know, big time college program here, and you know, it was a strange one to me, to be honest with you. I think that the visa thing is definitely a big stumbling block, Robert, because unless they are absolute game changers, it's unlikely that clubs are going to invest the thousands needed to get them over there. So the kind of holy grail is you hope that these guys have a European relative or something that would qualify them for a European passport, because that's probably the way around it. But the market here is massive. I think Rangers have probably took more advantage of that over the years with some of the American players that they've had in their first team. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if there's a bigger push in kind of North America, because, like I say, you have everything here, Robert. If you go to Miami, it's going to be Cubans, Mexicans, you know, Brazilians. You've got a real kind of diverse population there, and the talent level is very, very high. And like I say, they're like everybody in Scotland. They live and breathe football, you know. So it's there. You know, it's there. It's just, do we have the budget, you know, to kind of go and get these guys the visas and everything that comes with that, you know?
Yeah, like the boy Davis for Bayern, the left back. He came to America, didn't
Yeah, he was. Is it Alfonso Davis?
he? Yeah, Alfonso Davis. Aye.
I think he was. I think he's Canadian.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I listen. 100%. I think if you came here and watched the kind of MLS showcase event, you know, and watched the actual academy teams, you would look at it and say,
Wow.
There's no doubt that these lads are every bit as good as what's back home. You know, it's just that the market's a lot different, you know, and getting them over there is a hell of a lot harder as well.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely maybe something in the future that Celtic, as Jonathan says, it's the money side of it, but it's hopefully in the future we might get a wee gem again from kind of America and stuff. But again, Jonathan, I really appreciate your time. Me and Robert love the stories. We'd love to hear your own experiences in life as well. So I really appreciate your time. And obviously, I know maybe you're back in normal times in America, but again, just keep safe and obviously the rest of your life, mate. Coaching wise, hope you kind of kick on and hopefully we'll speak to you again.
Yeah, thanks very much for your time, lads. I've enjoyed it. So thanks for having me on.
Thanks very much,
Thanks,
Jonathan.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Yeah, lads.
Take care, Jonathan. See you after.